Welcome to Stories Cafe, where I'm your host for today's captivating mystery. We're joining Hercule Poirot at the enigmatic Villa Thespis for the last guests of Orchid Isle. Before we start, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. Drop it in the comments. Grab a warm cup of coffee, stay curious, and let's dive into this tale. The Last Guests of Orchid Isle, Chapter 1. An Invitation to Mystery. It was in early April 1940 when I returned to London on a week's leave. The war, dubbed the Phony War by some papers, was a tense calm before the storm we all dreaded. Stationed with my old regiment, my work was necessary but hardly thrilling, and I found myself yearning for the stimulating company of my friend Hercule Poirot, whose extraordinary cases had enlivened my past. His flat in Whitehaven Mansions was as pristine as ever, its symmetry a bulwark against the chaos sweeping Europe, as if Poirot's obsession with order could defy the world's turmoil. "Ah, mon ami Hastings," he greeted as I entered his sitting room. "What a delight to see you. You are well, yes?" "Quite well, Poirot," I replied, shaking his hand warmly. "Though civilian life seems to suit you far better than army life does me." Poirot's eyes sparkled. "The little gray cells, Hastings, do not pause for war. They persist, even in these troubled times." I noticed a cream-colored envelope on the small, impeccably placed table beside him, the paper luxurious with a faint perfume. "I see you've had some correspondence," I remarked, gesturing toward it. "Oui, it arrived this morning," Poirot said, his tone intrigued. "Most curious indeed. Your timing is fortunate, mon ami. This letter, it captivates me." "What sort of letter?" I asked, settling into the chair across from him. "An invitation, Hastings, from a Madame Vestry, a name unknown to me. She requests my presence on a Mediterranean island called Orchid Isle." "A holiday?" I ventured. "Sounds like a nice escape from wartime London." Poirot shook his head, his splendid mustaches twitching. No. I am invited as what she terms a theatrical consultant. Most peculiar, no? I, Poirot, who knows nothing of theater." "Theatrical consultant?" I echoed, my interest piqued. "For what?" He handed me the letter, its elegant handwriting flowing with artistic flair. I read quickly. "Dear Monsieur Poirot, I trust this finds you well in these troubled times. Your renowned discretion and insight have led me to seek your assistance in a matter of some delicacy. I'm assembling a company of once distinguished theatrical performers for a private production at my estate on Orchid Isle. The nature of this production requires not only artistic talent, but also the keen eye of someone who understands human nature in all its complexities. I would be honored if you would join us as a theatrical consultant. Your fee will be substantial $500 with all expenses covered. The engagement would last no more than 2 weeks enclosed. You will find information regarding travel arrangements and a list of my other guests I trust. Their names will assure you of the serious nature of this undertaking with sincere anticipation, Madame Elise." I turned to the second page, which listed 5 names, each vaguely familiar to me from theater programs or newspaper columns of years past. "Do you know any of these people, Poirot?" "Not personally, no, but their reputations, they precede them." Poirot's fingers formed a steeple beneath his chin. "Eleonora Valley, once a griot. Soprano Victor Lambert, the playwright who was recently accused of espionage. Heinrich Keller, the illusionist, who suffered that terrible accident. Daisy May, who rose from chorus girl to lady when she married Lord Haviland and Timothy. Forsyth, who managed the Grand Imperial Theater until that scandal with the investors' money. Not exactly at the height of their careers, are they?" I observed Precismar Hastings. "They are each one performers whose stars have fallen, yet this Madame Vestry brings them together for what she calls a grand theatrical comeback. It is a curious, You going to accept? Poirot's eyes gleamed the little gray cells. They are stimulated by this puzzle. Why should this woman, whom I do not know, request my presence for such an event, and why these particular performers, each with their own shadow hanging over them, perhaps? It's exactly as she says, a comeback attempt, perhaps. Poirot did not sound convinced. But why now, with Europe at war? Why on a remote island? And why request the presence of Hercule Poirot? Who knows? Nothing of theatrical productions. I had to admit his questions were valid. There was something peculiar about the invitation. Well, I said, I suppose you'll have to decline. My leave is only for a week, and I couldn't possibly, but you could. Mon ami, Poirot interrupted. I have taken the liberty of making inquiries. Your Colonel Barrington owes me a favor from that business in 36. He has agreed to extend your leave should you wish to accompany me. I stared at him in astonishment. You've already accepted, not yet, but I shall. And you, Hastings, you shall come with me to this Orchid Isle. We shall discover what comedy or tragedy this Madame Vestry intends to stage. I felt a familiar thrill of anticipation. Whatever awaited us on Orchid Isle, I was certain it would be no ordinary theatrical engagement. As Poirot carefully folded the invitation, Andre turned it to its envelope. I noticed how the late afternoon sun caught the silver gleam in his meticulously groomed hair. War had changed many things, but Hercule Poirot remained eternally himself, precise, methodical, and insatiably curious about the mysteries of human behavior. The telegram accepting Madame Vestry's invitation was sent that very afternoon, setting in motion events that would lead us to one of the strangest and most dangerous cases of Poirot's career. Chapter 2. The players assemble our journey to Orchid Isle, Tucas, first to Maros, and from there aboard a sleek private yacht sent specifically for our transportation. The Mediterranean was mercifully calm, though the same could hardly be said for the rest of Europe as we sailed farther from the mainland Inotite. How Poirot gazed thoughtfully back at the receding coastline. Strange. Is it not Hastings, he remarked, to travel toward pleasure while so many flee from danger? I had to agree there was something faintly disquing about our expedition. Luxurious, though our accommodations were, the island revealed itself gradually through the morning mist, a dramatic silhouette rising from the sea, crowned with what appeared to be magnificent villa. Set among terrace gardens as we drew closer, I discerned a natural harbor where our yacht was skillfully piloted to a small but well-maintained pier villa. The Spice announced our captain, gesturing upward, Madame's residence transport awaits you, indeed. A motor car of impressive proportions stood at the end of the pier, beside which stood a tall, angular woman, dressed in severe black, her hair pulled back in a tight bun that seemed to stretch the very skin of her face. Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings, she greeted us in a voice as crisp as newly starched linen. I am Miss Larch, Madame Vestry's personal secretary. Welcome to Orchid Isle. Thank you, Mademoiselle. Poirot replied with a slight bow. Madame Vestry herself, she does not come to greet us. Something flickered across Miss Larch's austere features, irritation perhaps, or unease. Madame is indisposed this morning. She extends her apologies and looks forward to meeting you at dinner in the meantime. I am to show you to your accommodations and introduce you to the other guests as they arrived. The villa proved even more impressive at close range. A harmonious blend of Mediterranean architecture and theatrical flourishes. Columns flanked the entrance, while stone masks of comedy and tragedy watched over. The main doors, our rooms, were adjacent and impeccably appointed with balconies overlooking the sea. After refreshing ourselves, Poirot insisted we explore the grounds ostensibly to admire the gardens, but I suspected equally to familiarize himself with the layout of the property. It is most peculiar, Hastings, he said, as we strolled along a path lined with exotic flowers. This island, This villa, they have been prepared with great expense and attention to detail, yet for a theatrical production. During wartime, perhaps this Madame Vestry is extraordinarily wealthy. I suggested perhaps Pooh conceded, though his tone remained skeptical. Observe, I believe we are about to meet one of our fellow guests. A woman had emerged onto a terrace above us. Even from a distance, she commanded attention. Tall, statuesque, with silver-streaked dark hair. Dramatically arranged, she wore a flowing robe of peacock blue and gestured expansively as she surveyed the gardens. Eleanora Valley. Poirot murmured the soprano, her Tosker, at Covent Garden in 26 was said to be transcendent. We made our way toward the terrace, but before we could reach it, the peace of the afternoon was shattered by a sharp, angry voice. My arrangements were quite specific. This simply will not do. The speaker was a man of medium height, with a scholar's stoop, gesticulating furiously at Miss Larch, who had appeared from within the villa. Mr. Lambert replied coolly, "All accommodations have been assigned by Madame Vestry herself. I'm afraid I cannot authorize any changes, cannot or will not demand it." Lambert, his face was flushed with anger, but I noticed how quickly he composed himself when he became aware of our presence. On new arrivals, how delightful. Miss Larch seized the opportunity for introductions. "Mr. Victor Lambert, may I present Monsieur?" Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings Lambert's demeanor changed. Instantly, his irritation replaced by intense curiosity. The detective, how extraordinarily interesting. I wasn't aware we were to have a sleuth among us. "Tell me, Miss Poole, are you here professionally? Or as a patron of the arts? I am invited as a theatrical consultant," Poirot replied mildly. Lambert's eyebrows shot up. "Are you indeed? How fascinating. I wasn't aware you had expertise in the field." "Nor was I," Pooh admitted, with a slight smile. Appeal of laughter interrupted us, bright, musical, and somehow calculated in its spontaneity. A woman appeared at the top of the garden steps, dressed in the height of fashion. Despite the remote location, her blonde hair was arranged in elaborate curls, and diamonds glittered at her throat and ears. "Victor, darling, don't be tiresome," she called. "If Madame wants a detective to consult on her production, who are we to question it? Perhaps she's planning a mystery play." "Daisy, may I presume?" I whispered to Poirot. "Lady Haviland." Now Poirot corrected softly as the woman descended. Toward us, she extended a gloved hand, first to Poirot, then Tome. "How thrilling to meet you both. I've always been fascinated by crime, fictional crime." Of course, her smile was dazzling, but didn't quite reach her eyes, which remained watchful and calculating. A common interest, perhaps. Came a new voice, deep and accented. A man appeared on the path behind us, leaning heavily on an ornate cane. The criminal mind and the theatrical mind, they are not so different. No, both require imagination, planning a certain flair for the dramatic Heinrich Keller. The newcomer introduced himself with a slight bow that seemed to cause him pain. Once I made elephants vanish, and beautiful women float in midair. Now, as you see, a struggle merely to walk without assistance. And accident, I believe? Poirot inquired politely. A shadow crossed Keller's face. "A miscalculation in my profession. Precision is everything. One mistake." He snapped his fingers. "Catastrophe." Speaking of catastrophes, Eleanora Valley had descended to join our growing assembly. Has anyone seen Timothy? Understand he was meant to arrive this morning. Mr. Forsyth's boat was delayed. Miss Larch informed us he should be arriving shortly. In the meantime, refreshments are being served on the main terrace. As we made our way there, I found myself studying our companions with growing interest. Each maintained a polished veneer of conviviality, yet beneath it I sensed currents of tension. Valley and Lambert studiously avoided addressing each other directly. Keller watched the others with an illusionist's attentive gaze, and Lady Haviland Daisy May flitted between groups with practiced charm that nonetheless felt carefully calculated Poirot. I noticed, observed it all with his characteristic blend of courtesy and penetrating attention. Only once did he lean toward me to whisper, "Not well." Mon ami, how each speaks of their arrival. The details they do not quite align before I could ask what he meant. A commotion at the entrance to the villa heralded the arrival of our final guest. Timothy Forsyth burst onto the terrace with the energy of a man half his age, booming greetings and apologies, in equal, measured, dreadful business with the boat mechanical failure. They said, though I have my suspicions, he pumped my hand vigorously. Then Poirot, Forsyth's the name, Timothy. Two, friends of which I hope to count you both before our little adventure concludes, despite his jovial manner. Yet noticed how the other guests received him with varying degrees of restraint. Something lay beneath the surface of these relationships, old rivalries perhaps, or secrets shared. The Mediterranean sun began its descent toward the horizon, bathing Villespis in golden light. As yet there was no sign of our mysterious hostess, Madame Vestry. But as servants began lighting torches around the terrace, I could not shake the feeling that we were all being observed players assembled on a stage awaiting the director's command to begin the performance. Chapter 3 Rehearsals and Revelations Dinner. That first evening at Villa Thespis was a sumptuous affair, though the promised appearance of Madame Vestry did not materialize. Instead, Miss Larch informed us that our hostess was indisposed and would meet us the following day. I noted how Poirot's eyebrows rose fractionally at this announcement. Though he made no comment, the conversation flowed as freely as the excellent wine yet beneath the surface pleasantries. I sensed undercurrents of tension. Eleanor Valley dominated much of the discussion, with theatrical anecdotes, while Victor Lambert offered sardonic commentary that occasionally bordered on rudeness. Timothy Forsyth laughed too loudly at every quip, and Lady Havel and Daisy flirted indiscriminately with all themen present, including Poirot, who received her attentions with amused tolerance. Only Heinrich Keller remained somewhat aloof, watching the others with the calculating gaze of a chess player, anticipating his opponent's move. "Tell me," Miss Larch Poirot inquired, as dessert was served, "what precisely does Madame Vestry envision for this theatrical revival? Surely the performers must prepare." Miss Larch nodded stiffly. "Indeed, Miss Rowe, each guest will receive their individual instructions tomorrow morning. Madame has prepared personalized portfolios. The theater has been fully restored for your use." "A theater here on the island?" I asked, surprised. "Villa Thespis was built by an eccentric Italian count with a passion for drama. Forsyth explained commissioned his own private playhouse, complete with all the modern trappings, must have cost a fortune." "How interesting that you should know this history, Mr. Forsyth." Poirot remarked mildly. A moment of discomfort crossed Forsyth's fit features. "Oh well, one hears things in theatrical circles. Fascinating property, quite famous in certain quarters. Perhaps you might enlighten us further on the tomorrow." "When we see this theater," said Poirot. "For now, I find myself rather fatigued from our journey." The following morning brought another disappointment for those eager to meet our elusive hostess. Breakfast arrived with sealed envelopes for each guest, delivered by servants who seemed to materialize and vanish. With practiced discretion, instructions announced Miss Larch, who supervised the distribution. "Madame requests your presence in the theater at 11, after you have reviewed your materials." My envelope contained only a polite note, suggesting I might enjoy exploring the island while the performers worked. Poirot, however, received a substantial portfolio bound in blue leather. In the privacy of his room, he showed me its contents, detailed notes on each performer's career, strengths and weaknesses, along with specific observations Madame Vestry wished him to make during rehearsals. Most strange. Hastings, he murmured, examining the meticulous handwriting. These notes, they are extraordinarily thorough, yet they focus less on artistic qualities than on character. What do you mean? Poirot indicated a passage about Eleanor Valley. Note how she responds. When her authority is challenged, observe whether she still favors her right side when under pressure. Curious instructions for a theatrical consultant. I admitted indeed, and observe. He pointed to another section, these remarks about Victor Lambie, his temperament when criticized may prove illuminating. Watch his hands during confrontational scenes. Perhaps she's concerned about managing difficult personalities, perhaps conceited, though his expression remained thoughtful. Come, Monomi, let us see this. Famous theater. The theater within Via Thespis exceeded all expectations. We entered through ornate double doors into a perfect miniature of a grand European opera house complete with plush velvet seating, sweeping balcony, and elaborate box seats. Flanking the stage, despite its modest size, it could seat perhaps 80 patrons. No expense had been spared in its construction or restoration. Victor Lambert stood center stage, gesticulating emphatically as he examined the script in his hand. This is preposterous. These aren't revival pieces. This is entirely new material. And frankly, beneath my talents, beneath your talents or beyond them, inquired Eleanor Valley with a poisonous smile as she swept past him to examine her own portfolio now soothed. Foresight, let's maintain professional standards. I'm sure Madame Vestas has her reasons. Her reasons remain as mysterious as the lady herself, remarked Keller, who'd settled himself in the front row, his damaged leg stretched before him. I find myself wondering whether she exists at all. Lady Haviland gave a theatrical gasp. Heinrich, what a suggestion. Is it so outlandish? Keller replied with a shrug. We are summoned to a remote island by an unknown patron who fails to appear or receive instructions from a secretary and servants who volunteer. Nothing does known. One of this strike you is orchestrated. An uncomfortable silence followed his words. Well, I for one am delighted to be here. Lady Haviland declared, breaking the tension with practiced ease. My portfolio contains a charming dramatic monologue. Quite flattering. Tommy, particular skills. Mine appears to be a one-act play, said Lambert, still frowning at his script. Something vaguely allegorical involving masks and mistaken identities. Derivative, if you ask me. How fascinating, said Poirot. Moving to center stage, each of you has received different material. The performers exchanged glances of surprise. You mean yours isn't a scene from La Traviata? Valley asked Lady Haviland, who shook her head. And yours isn't a dramatic recitation of the Hollow Men? Forsyth inquired of Lambert. Curiouser and curiouser, murmured Keller, his eyes narrowing. It seems we are not mounting a single production at all, but 5 separate performances. Despite this confusion, rehearsals proceeded throughout the day. Poirot observed attentively, occasionally making notes in a small notebook. I found myself equally fascinated by the performers and by Poirot's reactions to them. He seemed particularly interested when Keller mentioned offhandedly that he had adapted his illusionist skills to accommodate his injury. The accident that caused your disability? Poirot inquired delicately. It occurred during a performance. Yes? A shadow crossed Keller's face. A spectacular failure of engineering and trust? Ms. Poirot. One I do not care to revisit. It was during the evening gathering in the villa's magnificent library that the first genuine crack appeared in the performer's carefully maintained veneer of civility. Foresight, somewhat loosened by brandy, made a casual reference to that dreadful business in Paris that caused Lambert to stiffen visibly. I'd thank you not to resurrect ancient history. Timothy Lambert said coldly. Ancient hardly. Ancient 6 years ago hardly constitutes ancient. Forsyth replied with a dismissive Wave 6 years or 60. Some subjects are better left undisturbed, snapped. Lambert, how you can call it, undisturbed when it was splashed across every newspaper in Europe. Forsyth began, but Keller interrupted him. Perhaps we should all be more discreet. About past entanglements, he suggested smoothly. After all, we five share a history that predates Paris, do we not? A tense silence fell over the room. Victory lights Keller continued, his voice soft but clear in the stillness, a wartime review that ended. Rather abruptly, I believe that was our only collaboration as a complete ensemble. I noticed how each of the others reacted to these words. Val's fingers tightening around her glass, Lambert's jaw clenching, Lady Haviland's sudden fascination with her, Bracelet Forsyth's uncomfortable shift in his chair. Later, as Poirot and I retired to our rooms, I asked him about this revelation. Victory lights, have you heard of it? Poole nor me. But clearly it holds significance for our theatrical friends Poirot's. Expression was thoughtful as he straightened his cufflinks with meticulous precision and significance. Hastings is what we must seek among these curious instructions and unspoken histories, for I am beginning to suspect that Madame Vestry has assembled her cast not for a theatrical revival, but for a very different kind of performance. Altogether, Chapter 4, Death Takes the Stage the next day, brought a flurry of activity to Villa Thespis. Miss Larch announced at breakfast that the evening would feature a private performance, a dress rehearsal of sorts, to which all were expected to contribute. Elaborate costumes had been prepared and would be delivered to each performer's room by midday, and Madame Vestry inquired Poirot, delicately dabbing his lips. With a napkin, will she grace us with her presence this evening? Miss Larch's expression remained impassive. Madame will observe the performances and make her decision regarding the grand revival thereafter. Most irregular, muttered Lambert, slicing his egg with surgical precision, preparing without direction, performing without adequate rehearsal. It's artistic sabotage. Oh, do stop complaining, Victor, said Lady Haviland, with a tingling laugh that didn't reach her eyes. One might think you're afraid to perform. Lambert's face flushed. I fear nothing except mediocrity, Daisy, something you've never had cause to worry about, as you've never risen above it. Children Forsyth, intervened jovially, though I noticed a certain tightness around his mouth. Saved the drama for the stage, eh? Throughout the day, Poirot and I observed the increasingly tense preparations. The performers worked separately, each in a different part of the theater. Valley commandeered the stage itself, her powerful soprano echoing through the empty seats as she practiced scales with military precision. Lambert paced in the green room, muttering lines under his breath with increasing agitation. Keller had somehow arranged a small workroom behind the stage where he tinkered with various objects I couldn't identify, while Lady Haviland flitted between locations, ostensibly seeking advice, but seeming more intent on gathering intelligence on her colleagues. Preparations for, meanwhile, had assumed an unofficial role as master of ceremonies, coordinating with the staff and making arrangements for lighting and sound. I found his energetic efficiency somewhat suspicious. He knows this place rather well for someone who claims only passing familiarity. I remarked to Poirot as we observed him directing a servant to adjust the stage curtains. Indeed, mon ami, Poirot replied softly, and observe how Lady Haviland watches him. When she believes herself unobserved, there is history there. I think by late afternoon, a palpable tension had settled. Over Villapis, the performers retired to their rooms to dress for the evening's presentation, while servants transformed the theater's foyer into an elegant reception area, complete with champagne and elaborate orgues, Poirot and I dressed for the occasion, formal evening wear seemingly being expected, according to the note slipped under our doors. as we descended to the theater. I couldn't help but admire how effectively the villa had been converted into a venue worthy of London's West End. Our mysterious hostess spares no expense. I commented. Yes, Poirot agreed. Thoughtfully, one wonders what return she expects on such a considerable investment. The foyer gradually filled with the small audience for the evening's performance, Miss Larch, of course, along with what appeared to be senior members of the household staff. Still no sign of Madame Vestas. At precisely 8 hours, Miss Larch announced that the performance would begin in 15 minutes, and that Missy Poirot requested backstage to offer any final consultation backstage. It was a hive of controlled chaos. Eleanor Valley stood resplendent in an elaborate 18th century gown, while Keller adjusted a half mask that concealed the upper portion of his face. Lady Haviland sparkled in an outfit reminiscent of a music hall soubrette, though considerably more tasteful. Forsyth bustled about in formal evening wear, with a theatrical cape playing his self-appointed role of impresario to the hilt. Where is Lambert? Poirot inquired, glancing around the crowded space in his dressing room still primping. Forsyth replied with a dismissive wave. Prima donna tendencies. I'm afraid someone ought to fetch him. We begin in 10 minutes. I shall go, offered Poirot smoothly. Perhaps you would accompany me. Hastings, I confess, I am not entirely familiar with. The backstage layout, we made our way through the narrow corridor lined with dressing rooms. Lambert's door was at the far end, a paper star bearing his name affixed to it. In theatrical tradition, Poirot knocked briskly. L'Albihai, the performance commences. Shortly silence. He knocked again, more firmly, Monsieur, when no response came. Poirot tried the handle. The door was unlocked and swung open. At his touch, the scene that greeted us caused me to inhale sharply. Lambert sat at his dressing table, slumped forward. His upper body sprawled across the surface, most horrifying Washi's face. Or rather what covered it, a grotesque theatrical mask, had been forced over his features, a leering demonic visage that seemed to mock the stillness of the body beneath it. Montour, whispered Poirot. He stepped forward cautiously, 2 fingers extending to touch Lambert's wrist. After a moment, he looked up at me and shook his head slightly. Hastings, remain here. Permit Noon to enter. I shall inform Miss Larch that there has been an incident. But events overtook Poirot's plan. A scream pierced the air. Eleanor Valley stood in the doorway, her hands pressed to her mouth, eyes wide with horror. Victor, she gasped. Oh my God, within moments, the narrow corridor filled with people. Lady Haviland turned deathly pale and had to be supported by Forsyth, whose own face had lost its ruddy color. Keller alone remained composed, though his eyes narrowed as he surveyed the scene with clinical detachment. Nobody touch anything, Poirot commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. Hastings, secure the door, Miss Larch. I must ask you to contact the mainland authorities immediately impossible. She replied, her usual composure shaken but not destroyed the storm. Indeed, I realized, with a start, at the faint rumbling I had attributed to stage machinery was in fact thunder at some point during our preparations for the evening. A Mediterranean storm had blown in, and now rain lashed against the windows of the corridor. No boats. We'll risk the crossing until it passes. Miss Larch continued, we are isolated until morning at the earliest. Then we are also isolated with a killer, said Keller, softly, his accented voice cutting through the shocked silence that followed Miss Larch's announcement. I saw Poirot bend to examine something clutched in Lambie's lifeless hand, a torn scrap of paper that had carefully extracted without disturbing the body's position. He glanced at it briefly before slipping it into his pocket, his expression giving nothing away. The evening's theatrical performance had been canceled, replaced by a darker, unscripted drama. As I looked at the faces around me, shock, horror, fear. And in at least one case, a curious calculation, I realized that the mysterious Madame Vestry had indeed assembled the company for a performance, but the entertainment she sought was clearly of a more sinister nature than any of us had anticipated. Chapter 5. The second act, the hours following Lambert's murder, passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Poirot took charge with quiet authority, requesting that the body remain undisturbed until morning, when, weather permitting proper authorities could be summoned. He supervised the locking of the dressing room, pocketing the key himself after a thorough examination of the scene. "We shall convene in the library," he announced to the shaken company. "There are questions that must be asked and information that must be shared." The storm continued to rage outside, wind howling around the corners of Villepis like some primeval beast inside the grand library, with its towering bookshelves and leather armchairs, offered a facade of civilization that felt terribly fragile in the face of murder. Forsyth poured besides with a hand that trembled slightly. Lady Haviland had unnaturally still her usual animation, replaced by a waxen pallor. Keller had positioned himself near the fireplace, his damaged leg extended before him, his expression unreadable. Eleanor Valley paced the room like a caged lioness, pausing occasionally to sip from a glass of water, declining anything stronger with a sharp gesture of refusal. "Let us begin with the facts as we know them." "L'oreille de be assumed," said Poirot, standing before the fireplace. Lambert was discovered dead. At approximately 10 minutes before 8 out, he had been costumed for the evening's performance. Yes, confirmed. Forsyth, I saw him earlier in full dress. He wore a period costume, 18th century, like Eleonora's, rather splendid actually. And the mask, Poirot inquired, was that part of his costume uncomfortable? Silence fell over the room. Not that particular mask. Keller finally said there were several masks prepared for the performance. They were laid out on a table backstage. But Theon on Lambert's face was distinctive. How? So I asked. It was from my personal collection. Keller explained, a reproduction of a traditional demon mask from Japanese no theater. I brought it ASA potential prop, but decided against using it. It was in my workroom, not with the other costume elements. Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly, so the killer specifically selected this mask. Interesting. "Are we certain it was murder?" asked Lady Haviland, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mightn't it have been some sort of accident?" The mask was forced onto his face with considerable pressure. Madame Poirot replied gently but firmly, "And there are other indications of violence that make accident impossible. He was strangled." Stated flatly, "I saw the marks on his neck when they removed the mask." Poirot shot her a sharp glance, but did not contradict her. Instead, he turned to Miss Larch, who stood rigidly by the door. "Mademoiselle, the time has come for candor. Who is Madame Vestry? Why has she assembled this particular company?" Miss Larch's austere features betrayed nothing. "I am not at liberty to disclose my employer's identity or motives. Miss Poirot, I can only assure you that a theatrical revival was indeed the purpose of this gathering, a revival of what precisely Poirot pressed last night." Massey Keller mentioned a production called Victory Lights. "Perhaps you would all be good enough to enlighten me about this shared history." The 4 remaining performers exchanged glances laden with meanings I could not decipher. It was a wartime review. Forsyth finally explained his usual bonhomie subdued. 1917, a morale-boosting production for groups and dignitaries. We 5 were the principal performers. It was meant to be the highlight of my early career, added Lady Haviland with unexpected bitterness. Instead, it became a footnote, a disaster, barely remembered except by those of us who lived through it. "A disaster," Poirot prompted. The final performance was never completed, said Keller, his voice carefully. Neutral, there was an incident. A young actress died, Valley interjected bluntly. Clara Ara Barely, 20 years old. Talented, beautiful, ambitious. I noticed how she emphasized this last word, her eyes flicking momentarily toward Lady Haviland, who flinched almost imperceptibly. How did this young woman die? Asked Poirot. Another uncomfortable silence fell. It was ruled an accident, Forsyth said. Eventually, a piece of scenery collapsed during the performance. Clara Ara was underneath it. She died instantly, but there were questions added. Keller rumors of sabotage investigations that led nowhere. The war provided convenient distractions from theatrical tragedies. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. And after this tragedy, the five of you did not work together. Again, until now we scattered, confirmed Lady Haviland, different paths, different careers, the occasional professional intersection. Of course, the theatrical world is small, but never all five of us together, until Madame Vestris summoned you, Poirot mused. He removed from his pocket the scrap of paper he had taken. From Lambert's hand, does this mean anything to any of you? He placed it on Asmall table, where all could see it was a torn fragment of what appeared to be an old theater program or playbill. The visible portion contained only a partial cast list. Clara Ara de Victor Lam Eleanor. It's from the Victory Lights program, Valley, said her voice suddenly. Where did you find this in Moulinbert's hand? Poirot replied. It seems our murdered colleague was reflecting on the past shortly before his death. But what could a 23-year-old theatrical disaster possibly have to do with what happened tonight? Demanded Forsyth, wiping perspiration from his forehead with a silk handkerchief that Monsieur is precisely what we must discover, said Poirot. He turned to Miss Larch. I must insist upon seeing Madame Vestris immediately. Murder changes everything. Professional confidences must now give way to the demands of justice. For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across Miss Larch's composed features that may not be possible. Miss Poirot, because she does not exist, suggested Keller. With a humorless smile, she exists, said Miss Larch firmly, but her presence here is complicated. Whatever explanation might have followed was interrupted by a sudden, piercing scream from somewhere above us. We froze momentarily before rushing en masse from the library and up the grand staircase toward the source of the disturbance. A maid stood trembling at the entrance to the lighting balcony that overlooked the theater, a narrow walkway accessible from the villa's second floor, used to adjust and maintain the elaborate stage lighting. There, she gasped, pointing through the open door, Madame Valley saw her go in earlier to retrieve something, but now Poirot pushed past, gently but firmly. I followed close behind, and together we stepped onto the narrow iron balcony that ran the width of the theater. A figure lay sprawled across the walkway, the distinctive peacock blue of Eleonora. Valley's evening gown unmistakable, even in the dim emergency lighting. Poirot knelt swiftly beside her, checking for signs of life. But I could tell from his expression it was too late. Eleonora Valley, the once great soprano, lay dead, her body positioned in a grotesque parody of a marionette, with limbs at unnatural angles. Mondure, Poirot murmured, looking up at the cut rope dangling from the railing above, where someone had clearly sabotaged the safety barrier. It appears our killer has staged a second act behind us. Lady Haviland's voice, rosy in hysteria, first Victor, now Eleonora. We're being picked off one by one, a servant's, led the distraught woman away. I caught Pooh's eye in his expression. I saw not just concern, but a dawning comprehension. 2 murders. Hastings, he said quietly, each staged like a theatrical scene, and both victims connected to a tragedy from the past. The pattern becomes clearer. though the hand behind it remains hidden. Looking down at Valley's body, I couldn't help but think of her words just hours earlier about the young actress who had died during Victory. Lights Clara Ara. Devo, talented, beautiful, ambitious, whose death had been dismissed as a tragic accident. I wondered what secrets lay buried in that long-ago performance, secrets perhaps worth killing to keep concealed. Chapter 6, Behind the Masks. Dawn broke over Orchid Isle with deceptive serenity. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a washed clean sky and sparkling Mediterranean waters that seemed to mock the darkness that had descended upon Villa Thespis. 2 murders within. Hours of each other had transformed our theatrical retreat into a nightmare, from which there was no immediate escape. Miss Larch informed us at a subdued breakfast that a boat has been dispatched to the mainland to summon authorities, but rough seas in the storm's aftermath meant help would not arrive until afternoon at the earliest. Until then, said Poirot, accepting a cup of perfectly prepared hot chocolate, we must continue our own investigation. The killer will not wait politely for the official authorities to arrive. Nespa. The 3 remaining performers picked at their food in tense silence. Lady Haviland had abandoned any pretense of flirtatious vivacity. Her face was drawn, her eyes darting nervously between her companions' Forsyte's usual. Bonamy had deflated like a punctured balloon, leaving behind a man who looked suddenly older and distinctly afraid. Only Keller maintained his composure, methodically consuming his breakfast, with the same detached precision with which he had observed the previous night's events. Mr. Poirot, Miss Larch said, breaking the uncomfortable silence, Madame has instructed me to provide you with any assistance you require. So Madame Vestry does indeed exist and is aware of our situation, said Poirot, his eyebrows rising most interesting. And might we now have the pleasure of meeting this mysterious lady? Miss Larch hesitated. Madame regrets that personal contact remains impossible. Present, however, she has authorized me to grant you complete access to all areas of Villa Thespis and to answer any questions within my knowledge. Then perhaps you would be good enough to accompany us to the theater after breakfast. Poirot suggested. There are certain aspects of both crime scenes I wish to examine in daylight. The theater felt different in the harsh light of morning, smaller somehow and less magical. The crime scenes had been preserved as Poirot had instructed. Lambert's dressing room remained locked, and the lighting balcony, where Valley had met her death, was cordoned off with a length of velvet rope scavenged from the lobby. I should like to examine Miss Lomby's script. Poirot announced the one he was rehearsing yesterday. Miss Larch produced a key to a small storage room adjacent to the stage. All performance materials were kept here when not in use. Inside neatly labeled shelves contained the individual portfolio. Prepared for each performer, Poirot retrieved Lambert's and began to leaf through it with methodical care. Most interesting, he murmured after several minutes. This is not merely a theatrical piece, but a very specific recreation. Observed Hastings. He showed me a page containing stage directions. The scene described a masked performer confronting another character with revelations about a past. Betrayal culminating in the accused dropping dead upon the revelation, rather like what happened to Lambert himself. I remarked precisely, and look here. Poirot turned to another section where stage directions called for a character to fall from a great height, arranged like a puppet whose strings have been cut. Good Lord, I whispered. Just like Valley indeed. Now let us see what was planned for the others. Poirot reached for Keller's portfolio, then Lady Haviland's, and finally Forsyte's. Each contained scenes that described deaths with disturbing similarity to actual theatrical disasters or accidents from the performers' pasts, though none surprisingly referenced victory lights directly. So the killer is following a script. I said not precisely following monomai, but adapting it most creatively Poirot carefully replaced the portfolios and locked the storage room. Now I think it is time we examine the hidden room. You discovered this morning, following a tip from one of the servants, I had stumbled upon a small chamber concealed behind a sliding panel in the Theat's green room. Poirot had been with Keller at the time, questioning him about the Japanese mask used in Lambert's murder. The hidden room proved to be a sort of shrine to theatrical memorabilia, faded playbills, yellowed newspaper clippings, and photographs in tarnished frames covered the walls. A glass case contained costume pieces and small prop seat, labeled with meticulous care, "Look," as if pointing to a section of wall dedicated entirely to victory lights. Programs, reviews, and production photographs were arranged in chronological order, culminating in sensational newspaper headlines about a theatrical tragedy and young actress killed in freak accident. Poirot studied the display carefully, his eyes narrowing at a cast photograph. "Observe Hastings. There are our 5 performers, much younger, of course, and this, I presume, is the unfortunate Mademoiselle Desroux the photograph showed. A strikingly beautiful young woman with dark hair and luminous eyes, standing slightly apart from the main group, as though she had been added to the arrangement as an afterthought. Talented Aneno." According to these reviews, I noted scanning the clippings, and one who died most inconveniently added Poirot just as her star was ascending. We continued our examination, paying particular attention to the newspaper accounts of Clara Deroux's death. According to the reports, a heavy piece of scenery had broken loose during the final performance, crushing the young actress before a horrified audience of military officers and dignitaries. The investigation concluded it was an unfortunate accident, I said, summarizing one lengthy article attributed to wartime, material shortages, and hasty construction. Yet rumors persisted, Poirot noted, indicating another clipping from a less reputable publication, which hinted at suspicious circumstances and professional jealousy. Before we could discuss these implications, further a commotion from the theater called us back. We emerged from the hidden room to find Keller confronting Lady Haviland and Forsyth. His usual composure replaced by cold fury, you knew. He was saying, his accent more pronounced in his agitation. "You both knew what this was about from the beginning. That's why you were so eager to come to this island to protect yourselves." "That's absurd," sputtered Forsyth. "I had no idea." "Leary!" Keller brandished a sheath of papers. "I found these in Lambert's suitcase. He was writing a play, a true account of what happened to Clara Ara. He was going to expose all of us." I think Poirot intervened smoothly. "That now is the time for complete candor. Let us return to the library where we may be comfortable. It seems me, Lambert, had another script one, not provided by our mysterious Madame Vestry, the library, with its imposing shelves and leather armchairs, once again became our impromptu interrogation room." Keller placed Lambert's manuscript on the table before us. "Strings of Betrayal," Poirot read. From the title page, an interesting choice of words read, "Act 3. Keller said grimly, "The scene where Clara Ara dies. It wasn't an accident at all." Poirot turned the pages with care, reading silently for several minutes. The rest of us waited in tense silence according to this. He said finally, "Mademoiselle Deo was deliberately sacrificed because she had discovered something dangerous, a secret involving espionage. Hidden within the victory lights." Production Lady Haviland gave a small gasp. Forther's ruddy complexion had turned ashen. "Preposterous," he muttered, but there was no conviction in his voice. "Lambert was going to expose us." "All," said Keller. "That's why he was killed, and Valettu, she must have known something, or perhaps suggested she was involved in Mademoiselle Deo's death." The tension in the room was palpable, Lady. Haviland twisted her handkerchief into knots while Forsyth repeatedly mopped his. Braukeler watched them both with the cold, calculating gaze of a predator. "I believe," said Poirot, "that we are dealing with a most theatrical form of justice or revenge. Our mysterious host has restaged Victory Lights with a very different ending in mind." At that moment, Miss Larch entered with a silver tray bearing a small cordial glass. "Mr. Keller, your midday medicine," she announced. Keller took the glass with a nod of thanks, downing the contents in a single swallow before returning his attention to Lambert's manuscript. 15 minutes had not passed before he clutched suddenly at his throat, his face contorting in agony. "My medicine," he gasped, half rising from his chair before collapsing to the carpet in convulsions. Poirot rushed to his side, but it was already too late. Heinrich Keller's eyes stared sightlessly at the ceiling, his body grotesquely twisted in death poison. Poirot confirmed grimly, detecting the faint almond scent that lingered on the illusionist's lips. "Our third victim? 3 down 2, remaining. The pattern is unmistakable now." A servant removed Keller's body. I noticed Lady Haviland and Forsyth exchange a look of pure terror. Whatever secrets lay buried in their shared past, they now understood that someone was methodically eliminating everyone connected to Clara Aradeo's death one by one, in scenes scripted with macabre, theatrical precision. Chapter 7. The Forgotten Performance. 3 murders within 24 hours had transformed Villa Thespis into a house of shadows. The remaining guests moved cautiously through its elegant corridors, starting at unexpected sounds and avoiding darkened corners. Lady Haviland had taken to carrying a small silver letter opener, while Forsyth never ventured anywhere alone. Poirot, however, seemed energized by the mounting crisis. He spent the afternoon meticulously examining every document related to Victory Lights, occasionally making notes in a small black notebook. I had rarely seen him so absorbed. "Hastings," he said as late afternoon sunlight slanted through the library windows, "I believe the authorities will not reach us until tomorrow. The boat sent to the mainland has reported engine trouble. Most convenient for our killer, Nesuspa. You think it was sabotage? It would be consistent with the careful planning evident in everything else." Poirot tapped his pencil against his notebook. "Consider each murder recreates a theatrical death. Each victim connected to this Victory Lights production. Each killing requiring intimate knowledge of the villa and its occupants. Then you believe Madame Vestrick is responsible?" The mysterious Madame Poirot's eyes gleamed. "I have been giving her considerable thought, and I believe it is time we spoke with Miss Larch." Again, more forcefully this time, we found the secretary in a small office adjacent to the entrance hall, methodically sorting correspondence, as though 3 murders were merely minor inconveniences. In her orderly world, Miss Larch Poirot began without preamble. 3 people have died. The pretense of a theatrical revival has been shattered beyond repair. The moment has come for complete honesty about your employer. Miss Larch looked up from her papers, her expression as impenetrable as ever. "I told you, Miss Poirot, I am not at liberty." "Liberty, mademoiselle, is precisely what you may lose if you continue to obstruct a murder investigation." Poirot interrupted, his voice uncharacteristically sharp. "Now tell me, who is Madame Vestry, and what is her connection to Victory Lights?" For a long moment the secretary remained silent, her internal struggle visible only in a slight tightening of her lips. Finally she set down her pen with a sigh. "Madame Vestris is not what any of you have assumed," she said carefully. "The name is a pseudonym, of course, borrowed from a 19th century theatrical impresario. And her real identity—" I prompted. Miss Larch hesitated again before responding. "I cannot tell you that. I am bound by confidentiality. What I can say is that Madame has a profound interest in seeing justice done regarding events that occurred during Victory Lights, events that were deliberately concealed for over 20 years. justice or revenge?" asked Poirot. "Is there always a difference?" Miss Large counted. Surprising me with this brief display of emotion, she quickly regained her composure. "I was not aware that Madame intended anything beyond a confrontation. These deaths. They were not part of the plan I was privy to, yet you seem unsurprised by them," observed Poirot. "I have learned that theatrical temperaments are capable of extreme actions," she replied coolly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I must prepare for the authorities' arrival tomorrow," as we left Miss Larch to her paperwork. Poirot's expression was thoughtful. She knows more than she tells at one, but she has confirmed what I suspected. Our mysterious host seeks justice for Clara Aradeo. But why now, after all these years? I wondered that mon ami is a question to which I believe Lady Haviland and Monsieur Forsyte may hold the answer. We found them in the conservatory, sitting as far apart as the glass-enclosed space allowed, yet bound together by their shared terror. Ford clutched a brandy that did little to steady his trembling hands, while Lady Haviland stared fixedly at the exotic orchids that gave the island its name, Sea Forsyte. Lady Haviland Poirot greeted them. "The time for half-truths has passed. Clara Ara. Deva did not die accidentally. During victory lights, she was murdered, deliberately sacrificed by someone in the company. And I believe you both know exactly what happened that night in 1917. Lady Haviland's composure cracked entirely. "It wasn't supposed to end that way," she cried. "None of us knew what would happen to her. Daisy, for God's sake." Forsyte hissed. "But it was too late. Knew what would happen to whom?" "Precisely," Poirot asked gently. Lady Haviland looked at him with eyes swimming in tears. Clara, she discovered something she shouldn't have about the production. The espionage connection Moulambert mentioned in his manuscript. Poirot prompted. Forsyte set down his glass with a sharp click. Lambert was always too clever for his own good. Yes, there was more. To victory lights. Then morale-boosting entertainment. The production served as a cover for information exchange. Nothing treasonous, you understand? We were helping the alleys. We thought we were, Lady Haviland corrected bitterly. Victor arranged it all. Said it was patriotic work, passing coded messages through the performances. But Clara found out the truth. And what truth was that? I asked. Victor was playing both sides. Forsyte admitted the information we thought was going to British intelligence was also being sold to the Germans. Clara Ara discovered his coded logbook and confronted him before the final performance. So Lambert arranged her death to silence. Her Poirot concluded not alone, said Lady Haviland, her voice barely above a whisper. We all participated. God help us. Victor convinced us Clara Ara was the double agent that she would expose us all. Eleanor agreed to alter the scenery rigging. Heinrich created a distraction with one of his illusions. She faltered. I kept Clara in position on her mark, and Timothy ensured no investigation would follow. Webb believed we were protecting ourselves, and the Operation Foresight insisted it was wartime. Difficult choices had to be made, and afterward, Poirot asked, when you discovered Lambert had deceived you. By then it was too late. Lady Haviland replied hollowly, Clara was dead. We were all complicit, and Victor had evidence that would implicate us all if anything happened to him. A perfect trap, observed Poirot. And so you all continued your separate careers, bound together by this dark secret, until Madame Vestries invited you. Orchid Isle, we should never have come, Forsyte groaned. But you did, said Poirot, all of you. Why accept such a mysterious invitation, knowing the risk it might entail? Lady Haviland and Forsyte exchanged a glance laden with unspoken communication. The letters. Lady Haviland finally said, we each received letters before the formal invitations. They contained details, things only someone who knew about Clara Ara could know, and a promise. A promise of what? I asked. Redemption, said Forsyte, a chance to make amends, to tell the true story at last, and a substantial payment. Of course, echoed Poirot dryly. And now 3 of you are dead, and 2 remain. Tell me, did either of you recognize anything familiar about our elusive Madame Vestry, perhaps? Something in her handwriting, her turn of phrase, both shook their heads. I've never seen or spoken with her, said Lady Haviland. Nor, I added, Forsyte, then perhaps suggested Poirot, rising to his feet. It is time we sort out this mysterious lady ourselves. The answers we seek lie somewhere within Villa Thespis, and I believe I know where to begin our searches. We left the conservatory. I noticed a small white card had been placed on a side table near the door, the kind used for floral deliveries. Simple message was written in an elegant hand Finelec 8 p.m. I showed it to Poirot, who examined it carefully before slipping it into his pocket. It seems, mon ami, that our invisible hostess has finally decided to make her appearance. His expression was grave. Ash gazed out at the Mediterranean, now painted with the deepening colors of sunset. Tonight, I believe, we shall witness the true finale of Victory Lights, a performance 23 years in the making. Chapter 8, Final Curtain, as evening descended. Upon Villa Thespis, the theater took on an otherworldly quality. Someone had lit the ornate wall sconces and footlights, casting the empty auditorium in a golden glow that did nothing to dispel the foreboding that hung in the air like heavy perfume. Poirot insisted that both Lady Haviland and Forsyte accompany us to this final confrontation. Despite their obvious terror, if Madame Vestry wished you dead, he told them with surprising gentleness, she has had ample opportunity. No, I believe she desires an audience for this last act, witnesses to her grand revelation of what Forsyte asked, his once robust voice reduced to a whisper of truth. Monsieur replied, Poirot, the one thing that has been absent from this island since our arrival. We entered the theater precisely at 8, finding it empty, save for Miss Large, who stood center stage beside a covered easel. Welcome to the final performance. She greeted us, her voice echoing slightly in the hushed space. Please be seated in the front row. Where's Madame Vestris? Demanded Lady Haviland, clutching her small silver letter opener like a talisman. All will be revealed in due course, Miss Larch replied. Once we were seated, she removed the cloth from the easel, revealing a portrait of Clara Aradea, the same beautiful young woman from the Victory Lights promotional materials, but painted with such skill and intimacy that she seemed almost alive. In the theatrical lighting you may recognize this portrait, said Miss Larch. It hung in the London home of Edward Devo until his death 3 years ago. Clara Ara's father, murmured Forsyte. He never recovered from her death indeed. Not, confirmed Miss Large. He spent his fortune searching for answers, hiring detectives, following leads, all while maintaining his theatrical career as a means to stay. Close to those he suspected, it consumed him utterly, Edward de Poirot mused. I believe he was known for character, roles, and theatrical management, a respected figure in London theater circles. Yes, said Miss Larch, and also the original owner of Villa Thespis. A gasp escaped Lady Haviland. Edward owned this place? I had no idea. You did, replied Miss Larch. He purchased it through intermediaries in 1919, renovated it extensively, yet never visited. It was his contingency plan, the place where justice would eventually be served. And you, mademoiselle? Poirot inquired gently. What is your role in this drama? Miss Larch's severe features softened almost imperceptibly. I was Edward's assistant for 20 years, his confidant, the keeper of his records, and eventually his executor. So there is no Madame Vestris, I said, finally understanding. Oh, but there is, Miss Laura corrected. Maish turned to face the wings. You may join us now. From the shadows emerged a slender figure in an elegant evening gown. A woman, perhaps in her late 30s, with dark hair, swept up in a classic style, her features partially obscured by a delicate half mask, nonetheless struck me with their familiarity. "My God," breathed Forsyte, half rising from his seat. "It cannot be Clara," whispered Lady Haviland. Her face draining of color, the woman removed her mask, revealing a face that bore a striking resemblance to the portrait, though marked by time and experience. "Not quite," she said, her voice cultured and controlled. "I am Elise Deron." Clara Ara was my sister. Poirot nodded slowly, as though confirming a long-held suspicion. The younger sister, mentioned in Edward Devoe's biographical notes. "You would have been, 16 at the time of Victory Lights?" 15, she corrected, "too young to understand fully what happened, but old enough to recognize that the official story of Clara Ara's accident was a lie-me father devoted his life to uncovering that lie. I devoted mine to seeing justice done by becoming a murderer yourself," I asked. Elise Deo fixed me with a penetrating gaze. "I have murdered no one. Captain Hastings, I arranged for 5 guilty people to confront their past. What happened thereafter was the result of their own actions and choices. You deny responsibility for the deaths of Lumbee Valley and Kelapuro." Inquired, I provided the stage. She replied, "Nothing more," and yet said Puroweek. Death followed exactly the pattern laid out in the personalized scripts you provided. Each murder recreated a theatrical death from the victim's past performances, a mask for Lambert, a fall for Valley poison, for Keller theatrical justice. Elise acknowledged, but I was not the executioner. No, Poirot raised his eyebrows. Then who, madam, orchestrated these elaborately staged murders? Elise smiled sadly. Haven't you guessed the same people who orchestrated my sister's death 23 years ago? They have been eliminating each other, monsieur, just as they eliminated Clara. Lady Haviland gave a small, choked cry. That's insane. Why would we fear? Interrupted. Poirot softly. Fear of exposure, of prosecution, of disgrace. Each of you received letters before the formal invitations, letters containing evidence of your involvement. In Clara Ara's murder, each believed the others had also been threatened with exposure, and each decided that preemptive action was the only solution. Forsyte's face had gone ashen. You can't possibly believe Lambert moved first, he continued Poirot relentlessly. He prepared to eliminate those who could testify against him, but someone anticipated him. Someone who recognized the telegram that summoned me to this island was written in Lambert's distinctive style, not in Madame Vestrick's hand at all. I wondered about that discrepancy. I admitted folly, realized Lambert intended to betray them. All, said Poirot, so shacked at first, using the theatrical mask from Keller's collection to frame him, but Keller was equally suspicious and arranged for Val's accident on the lighting balcony. Meanwhile, Lady Haviland, or should I say, Daisy May, prepared the poisoned cordial that claimed Keller's life. This is outrageous, protested. Lady Haviland, rising to her feet, you have no proof, on the contrary, said, Poirot, I have the evidence from each crime scene, the distinctive scent of your perfume on the mask used to kill Lambert. The silk thread from Keller's costume caught on the cut rope of the lighting balcony, and your fingerprints, Lady Haviland, on Keller's medicine bottle, not just from delivering it today, but from when you introduced the poison last night. A tense silence fell over the theater. A perfect circle of murder, said Elise Deo quietly. Just as they silenced Clara Ara to protect their secret, they have now silenced each other. I merely provided the opportunity and observed, and Miss Forsyte asked Puy what was to be his theatrical end. I believe he intended to escape, said Elise. The boat that reportedly developed engine trouble, it was sabotaged by Mr. Forsyte himself, who planned to repair it secretly and flee before the authorities arrived. before Ite's composure finally shattered. "What else could I do?" he cried. "We were being hunted. Lambert was writing that damned play to expose us all. Valley was negotiating with a publisher for her memoirs. Keller had to become obsessed with setting things right before he died. It was only a matter of time before one of them cracked. So you accepted the invitation to Orchid Isle." "Ah, voilà," said Poirot, seeing it as an opportunity to eliminate all threats at once. "I never intended," Forsyth began, but Lady Haviland's brittle laugh cut him off. "Oh, stop pretending, Timothy. You're no better than the rest of us." She turned to Poirot with a strange dignity. "We did kill Clara, our Diro, and yes, we have been killing each other exactly as she says." "What happens now?" said Poirot. "Justice takes its course. The authorities will arrive tomorrow. The evidence will be presented. The truth of both, Victory Lights and the events of the past 2 days, will finally be known as if on cue. The theater lights dimmed slightly, then brightened again. A theatrical signal for the end of a scene. How fitting, remarked Lise Deveau, that it should end where it began. On a stage with a performance that revealed more truth than the audience expected later that night, as Poirot and I stood on the villa's terrace watching moonlight silver the Mediterranean. I could not help but reflect on the twisted path that had led to this resolution. "A most remarkable case, Poirot," I said, "but tell me, how did you know it was the performers themselves committing the murders? Surely Elise Diarou had the strongest motive." "Ah, mon ami," replied Poirot. "That is precisely why it could not be her. The truly vengeful heart seldom kills. Directly, it prefers to watch its enemies destroy themselves. Madame Deveau created the perfect environment for suspicion and fear to do their work. She needed only to assemble the players and provide the stage, the guilty consciences. Did the rest?" He gazed thoughtfully at the distant lights of a passing ship. "The past is never truly buried, Hastings. It waits sometimes for decades until the proper moment to return to the stage. No script can be rewritten once the final acts have been played. And for our theatrical friends, the curtain has at last come down on their most tragic performance." Moonlight caught the silver in his meticulously groomed hair as he turned away from the sea in his expression. I saw not triumph, but a somber satisfaction that justice long delayed had finally found its voice on Orchid Isle. Thanks for joining us for the last guests of Orchid Isle. Did you suspect that the performers were eliminating each other before Poirot revealed the truth? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this adventure with Poirot and Hastings, don't forget to hit subscribe for more mysteries daily. Until next time, remember Poirot's wisdom: the past is never truly buried. It waits, sometimes for decades, until the proper moment to return to the stage. No script can be rewritten once the final acts have been played.